I'm going to very briefly touch on oil dependence, which is one side of the coin, like Tony was explaining. I'm going to talk about gold, which is one of the energy transition minerals, the other side of the coin. Some comments on the energy situation in Colombia, and then propose some questions. So in the next slide, you see that Colombia is a nation of 50.3 million people, very geographically complex, resource rich, mega diverse, with a lot of social inequality and very highly concentrated land that saw the country immersed in a half century of armed conflict. Is still in an armed conflict that is mainly affecting the rural dwellers, indigenous, Afro-descendant people, campesino people, the Colombian peasantry. And it's a country that for a couple of decades now has been heavily relying on exports of resources for the economy. So in the next slide, you'll see an image of, and that has caused a lot of tension across the political spectrum. This slide is images of Colombia in late 2019. So that's a reflection of the wave of protests that we saw throughout the continent because of a number of social grievances. This is not something that oil caused or that gold caused, but it is difficult to separate because there has been a crisis because of the dependence, and there's been tax reforms and budget changes, and people here are protesting, asking for more money for education, for more commitment to investment for the peace agreement, concerned about the possibility of regressive tax reforms, and also because of a massive wave of murder against the people who are social leaders in the regional communities. So if we look into the next slide, you can see that there is a relationship with resources and this economic crisis. Colombia has relied a lot on oil exports. That was all very well when we were in the commodity super cycle, but after 2014, that has been changing. If you go into the next slide, in terms of the GDP, is recovering, but the last time I checked, the exports of oil were about 50% of the exports. And then after that, you have coal. So there's a fair bit of reliance there. In the next slide, you'll see that Colombia is very much a text, like a textbook case of what happens with oil and armed conflict. So the particularity of Colombia is that the distribution of royalties was quite decentralized. So huge amounts of money were flowing directly to regional governments in Colombia, making them very easy targets of the attempts at capture from different armed groups across the political spectrum. And then the oil companies, because of the nature of the sector, also vulnerable to extortion payments. And these different armed groups were very successful at doing both. There are several people who used to be part of those regional governments who are serving jail sentences because of collaboration with armed groups. And the companies used to pay extortion payments, famously in the 1980s when the ELN guerrilla, one of the remaining guerrillas, was an alien guerrilla. One oil contractor paid in 1983 between $2 and $5 million in an extortion, which saved the guerrilla and allowed it to continue to expand and move into other regions. So oil didn't cause the armed conflict, or neither did gold, but it's very difficult to separate because they have definitely financed it. So the question is there, I think we went backwards. The question is there, what size is the bounty going to be? And is it going to continue to be an incentive for the armed groups? When it comes to mining, it's not such a big percentage of the GDP, although coal used to be big, but that's becoming a problem as well. The thing is that mining is seen as a strategic sector by the government. It has been seen like that for quite a while. In the next slide, you'll see the Colombian flag. The yellow in the Colombian flag refers to Colombia's natural wealth. And historically, that was a reference to Colombia's gold. So with the energy transition, the idea that the government has is we're going to earmark a few gold projects, a handful. There are not very many big, large-scale mine gold projects in Colombia. But the idea is to fast track them to make the most of this possibility with the energy transition. That is one perspective. However, although there's not a lot of large-scale mining, what there is a lot of is illegal mining. And in the next slide, you can see another version of the Colombian flag, which is an artwork by Antonio Caro. The word minería is mining in Spanish. And the symbolism here in this play with the flag is saying that the wealth, the yellow of the wealth in the flag is concentrated in those who do mining, and elsewhere is left desolation, and destruction. And in Colombia, it's been estimated that as much as 70% of the gold that is mined could be informal. And a lot of that is part of the illegal economy. Without trying to put everyone in the same basket, there's a fair bit of participation of illegal armed groups in that sort of gold mining. So without environmental controls, without social controls, and with the sponsoring, the protection, or the control of some of the armed groups. So that's moving across the territory, terrorizing people and exerting violence against social leaders. If we continue, you know, when the gold price has gone higher, there is more of the illegal mining and more problems like this in the territories, which are very difficult to control. This is concerning because Colombia, since the signing of the 2016 peace agreement, has seen a massive wave of murders of social leaders, people campaigning for human rights, for land rights, for the environment. This is just from January to April, in the years from 2017 to 2020, just how many social leaders were killed. And you can see the spike at the beginning of the pandemic as well. Depending on the source you consult, people will tell you that after the peace agreement and leading into mid last year, between 350 and 442 social leaders were killed, a massive number of social leaders. If we continue, thank you. So with the commodity side, there's these concerns, you know, if you have more projects, what's going to happen in terms of contention, local contention, and what are going to be the consequences for people who are detractors of the different projects. That's the reality situation in Colombia. On the energy side, we can look at some more opportunities and kind of more hopeful side. In the middle, forgive me, a lot of this is in Spanish, it's from the Colombian government. In the middle, there's a donut, and you can see that the green sector is the transport, is the largest user of energy. It hardly, in the green box, you see hardly uses any electricity. It's mostly fueled by hydrocarbons. The industry is the second user, a lot of hydrocarbons there too, some electricity. And in residential, we have a fair bit of firewood being used. There's 500,000 people still not connected to the electricity network. Then there's electricity use and natural gas, which is the preferred cooking fuel. If we look at Colombia's energy matrix, there's good news there because hydroelectricity is almost 70% of the electricity matrix. The rest is hydrocarbons, and there's a very small participation of wind and solar of 1%, which is set to increase to 12% as of 2021, thanks to regulatory initiatives like auctions that have allowed the allocation of some of that, those energy projects to that type of renewable energy. So from there, you can see very clearly that one of the big opportunities is going to be to electrify the transport fleet, you know, and that's going to be a big call for regulators. There's a number of proposals on the table that I don't have time to go into, but that is, the government is considering that as being one of the lead factors in the energy transition within the country. So if we continue, please. So you can see there's different questions there. Hydroelectricity, great, but we also get the El Nino phenomenon in Colombia. And when that happens, the reservoirs go down very, very low. Last year, they were at 50% capacity. What are the backup fuels? We have coal-fired power stations in Colombia and also gas-fired power stations. So in terms of the energy security, they are still an important part of the mix. The other thing is of the gas that is produced in Colombia is used in Colombia. And in terms of oil, there is a need to still maintain the supply of the different liquid fuels, and there's about 47% that's consumed internally and the rest is exported. So there's also questions there about how many years of reserve need to be there, which is why that's what the government uses to justify continuing to look for oil projects and of course coal and gas projects as well. So there's a question there, how is it going to be balanced, the energy security question with the environmental responsibility question and social equity. So just to finish, I was pressing on my own keyboard. Some of the questions that I've been putting forward, you know, is the oil bounty going to be too small at some point, maybe, that the armed groups are not going to have an incentive to try to pillage those revenues? How are those armed parties going to adapt to those changes? because they go from one illegal activity to another. If there's new projects on the energy side or on the gold side or other minerals, what's going to happen to social leaders? And I think I'll leave it in there. Thank you so much for the chance to give a bit of an opinion here as well.